aspiring authors and have every intention of publishing a book one day. The two topics are plotting your masterpiece. I'm going to show you how to outline a novel. The second thing I'm going to talk about are the three most important ingredients that every novel needs, regardless of genre, to be successful. I'm going to start out with how to outline your novel, how to take those thoughts that are in your head and project them onto your page. Plotting your masterpiece. I'm going to teach you what's called the narrative arc concept. This is a macro approach to writing a novel. The narrative arc is a method that is designed to get all your ideas about your story out of your head and on paper before you type the first sentence. It is not the only way to tackle writing a novel. It's a method of approaching and breaking down the task that has worked for me. And I am the author of 36 novels, and I've ghostwritten 20. And it's something that I've been using for several years. It's landed me on several bestsellers lists, to include Dallas Morning News and Amazon. So I know that it's a method that works. And as an instructor here at Collin College, what I'm most proud of is the fact that this method is something that I've taught for 8 years, and 5 of my students have gone on to become published authors and get book deals. So I know that this approach works. The narrative arc is based off of 5 sections: the exposition, the rise in action, the climax, the fall in action, and the resolution. So with the exposition, it's just a fancy way of saying what kicks off the novel, what starts the novel. Now, you will notice that there are pink bubbles. Every author has ideas that float around in his or her head long before they ever grab their laptop. Some people take notes via phone. Some people have little pieces of paper or notepads by the bedside. They write down and they jot down their thoughts. The narrative arc is a way of taking those ideas that are kind of scatterbrained, getting them out your head and onto paper before you forget them. You'll notice pink bubbles here. The way book deals and book contracts work, and even when you're trying to get a book deal and you're dealing with literary agents, the standard is to have a 70,000 word manuscript. That's where the narrative arc comes in. Each pink bubble that you see, you'll notice one bubble allocated to each section of the narrative arc. It represents 3,000 words. I call these the big scenes. So when you are stuck in traffic, when you are babysitting, when you are at the dinner table, when you are trying to go to sleep and counting sheep is not working, and you start thinking of all these book ideas at those moments, the scenes in the book that you want to write that are the most prominent, the hardest hitting scenes, you assign them a pink bubble. Now, to illustrate what it is I'm trying to teach you, I use a book that I wrote about 7, 8 years ago as an example. So I had this idea that I wanted to write a book about domestic violence. That is all I knew. I just wanted to write an impactful, hard-hitting book on domestic violence. And because I understand what I need to get the book started, I need an exposition. I need something to get this, to jumpstart this story. So I decided to write a book about a young lady living in Katy, Texas, with her new husband of 6 months, and he beats her. Very hard-hitting, intense opening scene in this book. She then picks up the phone and calls her 3 older brothers here in the Dallas, Texas area. And they are 3 knuckleheads, 3 roughnecks, prison records longer than your arm. So if there's anyone that can save her, it's her 3 older brothers. And these men do not play when it comes to their baby sister. She escapes her abuser, gets to a neighbor's house, calls her brothers. The book is called Glass Houses because, as we all know, the old saying is that people who live in glass houses should not throw stones. So although the young woman being beaten is how the book starts, the book is really about the three brothers. Because one of the three brothers, the biggest hothead, he just beat his own wife the night before. The second brother is a deadbeat dad who hasn't seen his kid in 6 months, and he's been given an ultimatum by his ex-wife that if you do not come and get these kids this weekend, I will no longer be covering and hiding for you, and I'm going to apply for full custody. So it would behoove you to be here Saturday morning. Well, this phone call comes Friday night. Now he has a decision to make. What's more important, go and rescue his sister or go and take care of his kids? And the third brother, after doing a stint in prison, has changed his life, has become a Christian, wants to be a pastor, and he's designated by his pastor to give his first sermon this Sunday. So how do you beat someone up on Saturday and go stand in a pulpit on Sunday with a straight face? People in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. This book takes place, it starts, the exposition is at 10:30 on a Friday night. The book ends at 10:30 on a Saturday night. The entire book takes place in a 24-hour span, right? That's the book. That is all I had in my mind when I knew I wanted to write this book. I just gave you the elevator pitch. Now I'm going to show you how everything that I said, how it comes to life on this narrative arc. I started thinking of the biggest scenes. The woman calls her brothers. The brothers hop in the car, the arguments that take place during this 24 hours period. The brothers get down there. It stands to reason that at some point they're going to find their brother-in-law. And if they find the man who's beating their sister, naturally, it's going to be a big commotion. It's going to get ugly. Well, all of these things, I'm sure you can imagine, are pretty intense scenes. So according to the narrative arc, I know that these scenes need to be given pink bubbles. Pink bubbles represent 3,000 words. So what I do is I have these ideas of my book in my head, and I assign to the biggest and most intense scenes pink bubbles. Now you do the math. Remember what I said. In order to have a book deal, most literary agents want a manuscript, especially the only thing that's exempt are fantasy and sci-fi, things that require a lot of world building. But for the average romance, Christian fiction, contemporary fiction, mystery, they want at least 72,000 words, right? Well, I know that going into this. Well, if you do the math, if I have 7 bubbles here, and these are the intense scenes that 3,000 words are allocated to, I already know I got a 21,000 word book before I even get started. Now, you cannot go from big scene to big scene. No book or movie works that way. There must be transitional scenes that take you from point A to point B, right? Those smaller scenes, I give them a black bubble, all right? So as you can see here on the screen now, we have these pink bubbles surrounded by all these little black bubbles. These are the smaller scenes. So when this woman called her brother, Tammy Cole is beaten by her husband and she calls her brothers, those three bubbles that you see right here, this little cluster of bubbles. They didn't just take the phone call and miraculously end up in Houston. Something had to happen. That's the smaller scenes. What happened was their hot-headed father, who gave everyone a mandate to be back here at 9 o'clock Saturday morning. We're posseing down and we're going to get my daughter. And I expect all 3 of you be here, including you, choir boy, which is what he calls the one that wants to be a pastor. So you have this family pressure, and you have all of these other pressures for these 3 men, because the one who wants to be a pastor, his wife told him, I am pregnant with your child. You're a convicted felon. I waited for you while you were in prison. If you go down there and you get arrested, I can't guarantee you I will be here waiting for you when you return. So now he has that moral dilemma. What's more important, go and rescue his sister, or doing what he in his heart and his wife feels is the correct thing, and that's not going. But if he doesn't go, he looks like a coward to his father and his brothers. These smaller scenes, all of this interaction, I give those black bubbles. And black bubbles, folks, represent 1,500 words. They're not as big as the pink bubble scenes. They're smaller scenes, black bubble scenes, 1,500 words. I know from teaching this class for as long as I have, that is 21,000 words worth of black bubbles. Couple that with the pink bubbles, which are 21,000 words. And before I've even grabbed my laptop, I have a 42,000 word novel. Why is this important, folks? Here is why I teach the narrative arc. Experience has taught me that the thing that prevents a lot of people from writing their books is that they get caught up, young authors get caught up in trying to write in sequence. Chapter 1, they can't move on to chapter 2 until they finish chapter 1. They can't move on to chapter 3 until they finish chapter 2. And before you know it, they look up and 4 months have passed. They've been sitting on chapter 2 for 4 months on the same paragraph, and they're blocked. The cool thing about the narrative arc concept is that it is a clever way to sidestep this thing we call writer's block. You're not mandated to write in sequence. You wake up and you write to whichever bubble speaks to you that day. So you go, well, Brian, how much do I write? What color bubble are you targeting? I've already told you that the pink bubble represents 3,000 words. The black bubbles represent 1,500 words. You chose to put whatever topic you want in those bubbles. One bubble here says Miss Lee dies. Well, I'll give you an example how this works. I finished this book, sent it to my agent. My agent said, I love the book, but what happened to Miss Lee? Miss Lee is the woman who saved this young lady. She's the neighbor, 80-year-old Asian woman. I said, I don't know. I didn't think about it. She was just a secondary character. And my agent said, well, people are going to want to know what happened to Miss Lee. You need to give Miss Lee an ending. At the same time, I was watching Game of Thrones. And if you ever watch Game of Thrones, don't get attached to any character. So I asked my agent, I said, does it have to be a big scene, pretty intense? She said, no, just give me a little something. As a reader, I want to know what happened to Miss Lee. I love Miss Lee. So I gave her a black bubble, and at the end of that black bubble, she died. Right? But as you can see here on the narrative arc, the black bubble, Miss Lee dies. That was actually done after the book was written. And just so you know, this narrative arc for this book, when it was all said and done, had about 3 or 4 more pink bubbles and about 7 or 8 more black bubbles. But for the purposes of this class, I left a lot of stuff off. But what happens is you control your narrative. You control, more importantly, you control the steps in which you take to write your book. I am telling you, there is nothing more cumbersome and nothing will bog down your progress more than trying to be uniform in the way you write. Now, some people, they can only write that way. They will not move on to chapter 4 until they're completed with chapter 3. But the cool thing about this is that it lets you write. See, the thing about creativity is that it can't be bridled. That's what a lot of people learn once they start writing novels. You may not want to move on to chapter 4 until you finish chapter 3, but creativity may be ready to write about that thing that's going to happen in chapter 10. The narrative arc gives you the leeway to do that. You simply write to the bubble, whichever one that speaks to you. If it's a 3,000 word pink bubble, you write that, you put that information on a Word document. And when you get to that part of the book, you simply cut and plug it into your novel. So you go, well, Brian, yeah, but how, I mean, you're not staying to your word count. Yes, I am. I wrote 3,000 words. It's just not in sequence yet. It goes from being a manuscript or a novel to almost like a puzzle, right? So I'll have a Word document with 5 or 6 little mini paragraphs or pages, right? And when it's time, when I get to that part, I'll simply copy, cut, and paste. And it's the easiest way to write a book. Why? Because it allows your creativity to flow. There's going to be several times when you write your book that Case in point, I've written 36 novels, and 30 of them I wrote the ending first. I wrote the ending first. Well, how did you know what to write? What my pink bubble say? I just wrote about what that says when that idea came to me. And I knew what to write because the pink bubble says that I should be writing 3,000 words. And I sit down and I don't move from that computer until I finish 3,000 words. And once I finish it, I simply take that and put it on a Word document and say, I'll see you in a couple of months. That's how you do it. This is an effective method of outlining your book. And it is an effective method of making sure that you are always productive. You have no excuse for not writing something, right? Here's another cool thing about the narrative arc concept is that there's something implied in these bubbles. How many of you have ever been reading a book and you'll get halfway through or 3/4 of the way through and you just get bored with it? You don't want to finish it. And if you do finish it, it's only because you spent so much time reading that much, right? You almost feel obligated, right? If that author had used a narrative arc, he or she would have been able to predict where the book was going to get boring. How? The bubbles tell you how. If black bubbles are transitional scenes and they're smaller scenes, if you look at your narrative arc and there's a cluster of black bubbles, and there aren't any pink, intense, hard-hitting scenes, that's probably a visual indication that you need to stick something pink in there. If I had to predict at this point where this book would get boring, I would probably say right up in here. It's a large cluster of black bubbles, but nothing hard-hitting pink. So I know as I'm writing, or even before I write, when I look at this, I go, I can almost predict when people are going to find this boring, and it's my job as the writer to change that, if that makes sense. So it helps sidestep writer's block, and it gives you a visual depiction of your book so that you can have a good idea of where you need to spruce things up. Any questions about the narrative arc concept? No, let me say this also. So here's how you know you're finished. So for myself, when I'm not teaching, I'm book signing, traveling, and doing all the other stuff authors do. And there have been plenty of times I'll go away for 3 months. 3 months, yeah. But most of the time, it's usually 2-week increments. But I'd come back and not remember where I was in my book. Every time you finish a bubble, you simply change it to a blue, right? So how do you know you're finished? Because theoretically speaking, it should look like this when you're done. That's when you know that at a bare minimum, those first 42,000 words of thoughts and ideas about my book, at a minimum, I know I have that in the original manuscript. Now I can work with my editor and my agent and we can figure out what's missing. But at a minimum, I know that I have that. And why is that important also? Because, and this is kind of segueing into another class, but I teach a class on getting book deals. When it's time to pitch to literary agents, better yet, if you get an agent, it's time to pitch to publishers. They want at least 35,000 words written. So even if my book is not completed, I know that I got good 40,000 words and my agent can go to the acquisitions editor in confidence and say, this book will be done in 3-4 months, right? And how do you know? Because Brian's written 40,000 words. How do you know Brian's gotten everything in it? Because his narrative arc is blue. And everything that was an initial thought and essential to the book, we know it's in there, right? Any questions about the narrative arc concept?
For those of you watching via Zoom, if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat.
When you're working in the narrative arc and you have your basic idea, you've got your, like you said, your pitch.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever had a moment where you decide in your bubbles, you're like, yeah, no?
Oh yeah, these bubbles change. And that's a great question. there have been times where black bubbles turn pink, right? When I first had the thought, maybe let's go with this one right here, Miss Lee dies, right? Well, by the time I finished writing that, it was closer to 3,000 words than 1,500. Because you start writing and things start coming to you, and that little story within the story starts to take root. And before you know it, I had created an entire storyline for this woman, which ended with her committing suicide. And just so you know, that night when she happened to be riding down the street and I had her pick up this young woman running, she was coming back with pills that she intended to use to kill herself because she's the only person left in her family. Her husband's gone, her child is gone. This is an 80-plus-year-old woman who feels she has nothing else to live for. But for that moment, for that 24-hour period, she had one more task. And that was to keep this young lady safe until her family came. And the way I decided to satisfy my agent, who was also an avid reader, was, yes, I killed her, but it was after her final task was done, right? So I know you got to make some tough decisions when you write these books. Somebody's not going to, but let me tell you what happened. This book came out in 2000, I don't know, 15, 16. The book became an Amazon bestseller, made the Amazon bestseller list. Early this year, I was in Memphis, Tennessee, meeting with a book club, talking about this book. And the question that I was asking was why'd you kill Miss Lee? I love Miss Lee, right? Because Miss Lee's primary role was not only to be a savior, but I wanted to drive home the point that regardless of race, women have this maternal instinct that transcends all the other stuff. All this 80-plus-year-old Asian woman saw was this 26-year-old Black girl running in her night clothes, and the mother in her kicked in. Because that's all that matters, right? Come to my house, close the garage. By the time the husband came around looking, circling the neighborhood, all the garage doors are closed. He doesn't know which house they went into, right? And while she's sitting there waiting for the cavalry to arrive, this woman's patching and healing her up. And also pointing out the flaws in her decision-making process. She becomes a 24-hour maternal grandmother, right? And drops some nuggets on this young woman that if she had known, maybe she wouldn't have chose this partner, right? Her work was done. For those of you who are writing books, your secondary characters have one primary role, that is to move the story along, to get you from point A to point B. Do not treat a secondary character like a primary character. What does that mean? Don't be afraid to kill him. Her role was done. Yeah. If you ever read in a book and you actually like the sidekicks better than the protagonist, it's because the author gave the sidekicks more runway than he should have. We saw that with Star Wars, the movie. Most people, myself included, liked Han Solo better than Luke Skywalker. As successful as that was from a creative writing perspective, that was the flaw. Han Solo had the better jokes. Han Solo was better looking. Han Solo had the rebel attitude that people can relate to. Han Solo was a bigger character than Luke Skywalker. There's a reason why 30 years later, they came out with a spinoff and it was called Solo. Not Skywalker. She's over there laughing. I'm just telling you.
It just occurred to me that is pretty much the storyline of the Argonauts.
So, I mean, it's just, once you start writing, look, my students, they leave my class, they never read books the same way or watch movies the same way. And I just laugh because that's my goal. I need you to put on your writer lenses and take off you need to stop writing books and watching movies for entertainment purposes and actually start looking at them through the eyes of a scribe, right? So that is the narrative arc concept. Now, go ahead.
Oh, you have a couple questions
Go ahead,
in the chat.
go ahead.
Okay, so the first question was, how do you allow your characters to develop naturally in such a formulaic writing process?
Because within these bubbles, they can contract or expand, and any growth that your characters need to have can take place right within the bubble. Now, as I stated when I started this is not for everyone. If you go on YouTube or Google, you'll come up with 8 to 10 different methods of outlining. This is for those people who are having problems getting their ideas to the paper. Now, how do your characters grow? Your characters grow throughout the entire narrative arc process. No character ends the book the same way he or she starts the book, or at least he or she should not end the book the way they started. So the growth that the question is asking about, it happens throughout the story. And you have to keep in mind, folks, you only have 350 pages to get this done. So it's a fallacy if you think that you're going to follow the evolution of a character as if you're following them from the cradle to the grave. It doesn't work like that. You're mainly identifying one section of a character's life, and you're showing the transformation that takes place during that period of time. So the evolution, how do characters grow in this formulaic process? I would argue that this is anti-formulaic. There's nothing formulaic about this. This is the one outlining technique that gives you the freedom to roam. Formulaic would be not moving it on to chapter 3 until you finish chapter 2.
Okay. Another question was, does this narrative arc work for lengthier children's books?
That's the beautiful thing about it. It works for every genre. It does not matter. In a lengthy children's book, you still need a protagonist. In many cases, there will be something, the antagonist will take the form of an actual being or a situation that still has to take place. In most cases, that protagonist, even in a children's book, has a sidekick or someone he or she bounces ideas off, right? And what's most importantly is the perfect segue to the second thing that I want to teach you is that whether it be a children's book or a contemporary fiction book or a fantasy book, sci-fi, mystery, it doesn't matter the genre, your story needs 3 components, 3 ingredients. Your story, regardless of genre, needs 3 ingredients. And these are the 3 ingredients. Your story needs a dilemma, your story needs action, and your story needs a ticking clock. I don't care if you are writing some post-apocalyptic type book. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. These ingredients are universal, even if the style of writing changes. Your book needs to have a dilemma, some type of issue. Your storyline must have an underlying dilemma and or challenge that the reader can relate to. That dilemma must be intense enough to move the protagonist to action. And if you want to keep someone's attention, the dilemma that created action, you need to have some type of time frame. Deadlines create excitement. In order to make your reader become emotionally invested in the book, the protagonist needs to be under some type of deadline, literally or figuratively. Create a ticking clock scenario in your storyline. Those of you who watch shows like NCIS, Law and Order, and all these different things, sometimes they literally have a ticking clock on the screen. Any law enforcement police style book, when there's a bomb that they need to defuse, that's done by design. That's the ticking clock. That is the way they make sure that you come back after the commercial break. Now, as writers, we want to make sure that they turn to the next chapter. In order to do that, they have to have something invested. That investment is seeing whether or not your character is going to get to the finish line before whatever deadline you set place. If it's a romance novel, the deadline will be that this man needs to get back to town to claim the woman that he loves before she leaves with the other guy. He's in Alaska. She's on Friday and she's scheduled to leave on Sunday. He needs to get back to Dallas by Sunday, right? In Jaws, the deadline was, we need to kill this shark before he kills someone else. In Star Wars, the deadline was the dark side, led by Darth Vader, are going to take over the galaxy. And Luke needs to become this master Jedi and save the universe before X, Y, and Z happens. In the movie Taken, he needs to employ that particular set of skills before his daughter gets lost in the sex trafficking arena. And if you've read books like Of Mice and Men, Steinbeck was trying to drive home the point that Lenny and George need to see if they can get past this last obstacle, which is Lenny doing something crazy, before they can buy that farm. Right? In The Grapes of Wrath by Steinbeck, the goal was to get to California from Oklahoma so that we can build a new life before everybody in the caravan dies. Every story has these same elements, these same ingredients. These same ingredients. You have a dilemma. That dilemma prompts an action by your protagonist. And it is important, regardless of what you are writing, that you put your protagonist's goal on a time clock. Any questions?
Not in the chat right this second. Does anybody have any questions about that portion?
I have a
Go ahead.
question.
Mhm.
Do you find yourself ever having, are there many dilemmas in the, like you have the major dilemmas, action, time clock, but can you fill the black bubble sections with many dilemmas? Is
That's
that what
right.
they're for?
Right. Yes, you can.
Okay.
As I told you in the book that I used as our example here, the many dilemmas, VJ's girlfriend leaves with her daughter. Mrs. Cole, the mother of these three knuckleheads, who is a devout Christian, learns of their plan. By that time, they've already left. But they had to keep it under lock and key because she would have vetoed the entire thing.
Right.
But those fathers on this call, those of you who have fathers, I am a father. You understand how we can get when it comes to our daughters, right? And the father in this scenario, this was not a democracy. When it came to rescuing his daughter, we're going to get down there. Hell or high water. And I know your mom will complain, so I want you meeting me back here at 9 o'clock. This stays between the four of us. And if your mom finds out, I'm going to kill you. Right? So,
Another question
Go
in the
ahead.
chat. How do you remove a character in a children's book without killing them? I do not want to be like George R.R. Martin in a children's story.
Great question. You don't kill them. I mean, you have your protagonist, and either an antagonist or some type of situation that would serve as the antagonist, right? Some type of obstacle that becomes the antagonist.
Like Stephen Wilson's, he just went off to college.
Just went off to college. But remember, the easiest way to keep in mind what to do is that your secondary characters have one purpose, and that is to help the primary character accomplish his or her goals. Once that is done, you can simply write in the scene where the secondary character tells the protagonist, well, gotta go, right? Well, I have to leave and go to Louisiana, but before I do, let me help you out. Well, you've established to the reader that once that task is done, this character will be gone. So to the person who asked the question, you put the secondary character on a timeline. You establish in your writing that this character is only here to accomplish this goal, and once that goal is done, everyone's moving on. And since it is a children's book, it's actually easy because you don't have those tough decisions about whether or not to let this person leave with someone else, get hit by a car, or whatever the case may be. It's really not that hard. You simply make it clear this character is here to assist your protagonist, and once that assistance is done, c'est la vie.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to write it.
I hope that this helps someone. To the people that are here, do you think that this could help you in some way?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Any other questions? For those of you who are watching, if you happen to be in Collin County area, every semester I teach creative writing at the Courtyard campus. I've been there for 8 years. When I'm not teaching people, I teach 4 classes at the Courtyard campus. I teach how to write a novel, the basics of how to write a novel. It's an 8-week class. I teach blueprinting your novel, which is a class that is designed to be the follow-up to the first class. And I teach people how to package and get their books ready to pitch to literary agents. I teach a marketing and promoting it novel. My background is business. I have an MBA. Before I started writing books, I used to do the corporate America thing, and I teach marketing. And I used to own a few years back, I owned a publishing company. So I teach people how to pitch their novel, how to sell the novels once you get the book deal. Because the first thing you learn in this business is that getting the book deal and writing the book is the easy part. Selling the book is the hard part. And you have to sell the book or else your contract doesn't get renewed. So if you want to learn how to write a book, how to get a book deal, and how to actually sell the book once you get your book deal, go look at the continuing education division over at Collin College, the Courtyard Center. Every semester, I teach a class, those 3 classes there. And starting in January, because I'm also a screenwriter, I write movies, which is why I reference so many. Just so you know, I reference movies because what I've learned is that not everyone has the same reading taste. But for the most part, we've all seen the same movies. It's just, and the writing is the same. The only thing different between novels and screenwriters, screenplays is the format. But the principles are the same. So last but not least, if you are someone who wants to write a screenplay for either television or the small screen, TV screen, I teach a class at Collin College at Courtyard Center, the basics of writing screenplays.
And those are continuing education.
Continuing education.
They're not credit courses.
You know what? Some people have over the years, some people have used it as an elective.
Oh, okay.
For those people, I guess they would be English majors by day. And for whatever reason, they need another class. My class has been used over the years as I guess would be the equivalent of an elective.
Okay. And somebody else asked, do you offer any online classes?
No. I did for 2 years, but the school opened back up, and now these classes are taught. They are taught at the campus.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Does anybody have any other questions?
want to take a minute.
Are you done?
Yeah, I'm done.
Okay. All right, thank you so much for attending. If nobody has any other questions, I just wanted to remind everyone that there are a couple more workshops in the series. Thank you so much for joining us so far. Next Tuesday, November the 16th, we will have developing characters and dialogue. And then on November the 30th, we're going to skip the week of Thanksgiving. We will have a publishing workshop. So we would love, love, love to see everyone there. Thank you so much for your attendance.
I do have a question. I didn't want to have it go